Welcome to a special edition of Daily Airline News focusing on the search for MH370 and other issues. Today, joined by two co-hosts, Richard Godfrey in Germany. Good morning, Richard.
Good afternoon, Jeffrey.
And Blaine in Asia. Good afternoon, Blaine.
Good afternoon.
And before we get started on the questions, which you've sent in, which are fantastic questions again, Richard's got a clarification which he would like to discuss.
Yeah, we talked yesterday about the yokes on the Boeing 737 of China Eastern, and we mentioned that they were mechanically linked in answer to a question. But we did not make it clear that that was in both axes, pitch and roll. And there are breakout mechanisms on both axes. So thank you, Imperfect Stranger, for pointing that out, and hope that clarifies. That actually leads to a very interesting observation from the ADS-B data for China Eastern, that there were manual inputs via the yoke in both pitch and roll, and on the foot pedals, which control the yaw, and the throttle levers. So each dimension, pitch, roll, yaw, and the speed were all manually changed on the flight. There were turns in the horizontal plane, flying an S-curve initially without excessive side slip. At the same time, a steep dive in the vertical plane. But as we pointed out in the episode we did, the aircraft leveled out, and it was also at that point in a straight and level flight for at least 21 seconds. And at the end of that, there was a sharp turn with a massive horizontal side slip, and the final direction was 114 degrees true, which aligns with the crater at the crash location, which we estimated 125 degrees true on the longitudinal axis. So what am I saying with all this data? In my view, this all points to a struggle in the cockpit.
Yes, it certainly does look there. And also, I must add another clarification too, which is my fault. Not that I'm saying, Richard, that was your fault. It was just a clarification, but this was my fault. The image we showed, in fact, was not the China Eastern aircraft. It was actually a Silk Air recreation. So my apologies for that. And unfortunately, it was too difficult to correct it once we realized I'd made that error. So another clarification. More like an admission. But Blaine, you've got a clarification as well.
Well, just one thing from a few days ago, the last time on, there was a question from someone named Volko Vadaria about a statement on the MH370 family's Facebook page. And you asked me to address it, and I didn't want to get into the specifics of it, except I do want to clarify that it was not a statement written by the MH370 families. There was a lot of confusion about that on the internet. It was written by the MAS Family Support Center Malaysia Airlines Group, an official organization, Malaysia Airlines, and emailed to the 370 families, and they simply posted it verbatim on their Facebook page. So just to clarify that.
Right. It's always good to clarify these things, and sort of, that really reinforces the fact that we're just simply dealing with facts and nothing else but facts. Now, question, Richard, for you on MH370 from Brian Bosworth 7555. Question, gents, please. What is your opinion as to why MH370's Satcom system rebooted around 2:25 a.m. How can this be done from the cockpit? And could it have been tampered with to show a reverse Inmarsat location of the plane? Is this possible to do? Great show, gents. And you pronounce my surname, yeah, Osmothworth, just to show you. Yeah,
Yeah, it's good that people are telling us how to pronounce their names because some of
yeah,
the pseudonyms and names used are quite abstruse.
yeah.
Um, Coming to the question, there are several ways to power down the satellite data unit and the Satcom system, including several ways to do it from the cockpit. The key way to actually do it would be to go down into the mech, the equipment center underneath the cockpit, and you will then find a Satcom circuit breaker on panel P110. But you have to know what you're doing and which circuit breaker on which panel. But to do it from the cockpit, one way would be to switch off the left main AC 115 volt bus. We're showing a screenshot of the overhead electrical panel in the cockpit. Um, that is pretty radical to switch off the left main bus because it takes also some other equipment, not just the satellite data unit with it when you switch that off or isolate that bus. Another way was pointed out by Captain Patrick Blelly and Jean-Luc Marchand in their analysis, and that is even more radical. You can switch off the left and right main buses and the APU, from which would automatically start in the event that the left and right main bus were isolated. But you can then switch off the APU and prevent that from starting. And then the ram air turbine would deploy, which gives some hydraulic power and some electrical power sufficient to be able to fly the aircraft. It's designed for an emergency situation, but it is also possible to use that method. So it's quite complicated. There's a lot you could do from the cockpit. As to the reversing of Inmarsat data, I don't think so. It cannot be done by tampering, or some people are talking about a hacker hacking into the system and changing the data. This data is captured and distributed via satellite in real time to several databases. So it would be mightily complicated to hack into not just the computer system on board, but everywhere that data got distributed via satellite in the world, and all of those databases simultaneously. So I really don't see that happening.
Still on MH370, Blaine, Lewis Lomelli 2857 wants to know. The question is, one of the Belly Machard, UWA or Whisper possible crash areas, which one do you think has the best possibilities? Do you have your own location? Salute from Mexico.
Well, salute, Luis, and thank you for your question. And first of all, just let me make it clear that the Whisper area is within the UWA area. So it is not either or. The UWA area, the drift analysis, shows that the most likely crash site is somewhere between 28.3 degrees south and 33.2 degrees south, wider from the seventh arc than searched before. And that has always been Professor Patiarachi's drift analysis. It hasn't changed. It accurately predicted the timing and arrival of Malaysia 370 debris. And that's where I have always believed the plane is. That is the drift analysis that guided me in my successful search for debris. The whisper location narrows that down. It is a small area within it, up around 29.1 degrees south, the northern edge of it. Now, just to clarify, there is also a specific simulation location. Professor Cherry did many simulations all over the area and came up with this analysis. That simulation location is at Broken Ridge, 32.5 degrees south, 96.5 degrees east. And that is a possible crash location. It's always been sort of my favorite for years, long before Whisper was even conceived of as being possible to track 370. So that is one possible location at Broken Ridge, and Whisper is more specific and north of there. And so, you know, I'm a wreck hunter, not a rocket scientist, but I'm convinced that the Malaysia 370 crash site is somewhere in the UWA area. Good chance it's at the Whisper site with Mr. Godfrey's work. Another good chance it's down at the Broken Ridge from that original simulation, or anywhere in between. So that's where I think it is. And I'd start out with the Whisper location because that's a small area. They need to find it as soon as possible. It's within the UWA area, so it's not either or.
Yeah, good answer. Richard, motorhome Voyager, UK 69. Sounds like a person who's getting around in a motorhome. What a great way to get around. I have a question about MH370. How would travel insurance deal with the loss of life if there are no bodies? How about the insurance for the aircraft?
Yeah, on life insurance, it is possible to be declared missing and presumed dead. That is a legal step, and life insurance normally wouldn't pay out until a judge or a court had declared someone missing and presumed dead. And I know for a fact from some of the next of kin that has actually happened. On the aircraft insurance, the Allianz Insurance in Germany were the insurers for a hull loss of MH370, the 9M MRO airframe, and they have paid out already to Malaysia Airlines.
Blaine, Buffalo Rick, 5598. Whether Vance is correct or not about a controlled landing, wouldn't part of, if not all of the fuselage be intact?
Well, there are a few things we can say categorically about Malaysia 370. And one we can say categorically is that it is not intact underwater, and the fuselage is not intact underwater. You can see here this piece right here. This is with the hexagonal honeycomb. It is from the main cabin wall inside the fuselage, the passenger cabin of Malaysia 370. I am in a room with natural light coming in. I am not under 4,000 meters of water in the dark under pressure. So here is just one piece of evidence. There are many, many more. I have found and held in my hands more than a dozen pieces of shattered main cabin debris. And it's kind of amusing that you mentioned Larry Vance, because the first time I ever heard of Larry Vance, I had just found about 9 pieces of Malaysia 370 debris, including 5 from the main cabin. on Sirica and Riake Beach, and I had gone to Antananarivo to hand it in. So I was sitting in my room surrounded by about 5 pieces of shattered Malaysia 370 cabin debris, including the monitor case, which not only proves that did the fuselage shatter, but the main cabin shattered, but also a seat in economy class shattered to show this monitor case. And so I was sitting around with all these pieces around me, watching the news coverage because I just released the news to the French, to Madagascar, and to BBC. And on the internet comes a guy named Larry Vance proclaiming that the 370 fuselage is intact underwater after a controlled intact ditching. And I'm just like, whoa, dude, turn on the news. I mean, maybe you decided this back when 370 crashed, but look at the evidence. It's not intact underwater. I am not intact underwater. So I think it's time that we just move on from these wild ideas that 370 was shot down in the South China Sea or buried in the sand at Baikonur or intact underwater in 40 degrees south or whatever, intact after a ditching, or Forbes's orbs gone into outer space. These simply did not happen. So let's just look at the evidence, decide what the evidence is, base our search on it, base things on facts, and go find the plane and then get the truth and the proof of what happened.
It's interesting with air crashes, and I've covered many of them. The strongest part of an aircraft is the wing box, which is the whole heart of an aircraft, which is where the undercarriage is retracted into. Some of the fuel tanks are there. So typically in an accident, the aircraft will break. If it breaks apart, it'll break apart ahead of the wing box and it'll break apart behind the wing box. So it'll break into three. And that's possibly what happened with MH370. So you probably find there's three major pieces on the ocean floor, but when it breaks open, obviously it releases things like you suggest, Blaine, parts of the cabin, some of the bits and pieces, the seat back monitor case, things like that would be released in such a circumstance. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, but with so many air crashes, you get damage, the breakage ahead and behind the wing itself. Richard, Paul Todd, 3497, and this relates to somewhat to what's happened to the debris. How strong are the underwater currents on the ocean floor where Whisper is located? Has there been any study on the ocean currents on the Indian Ocean floor? Take into account that currents on the ocean floor will be different to the currents on the surface of the Indian Ocean. Thanks for your dedication.
Yeah, we did an episode previously on the work of Professor Charita Patiarachi. He has a very complex oceanographic model. They not only consider the currents to different depths or in different layers, close to the surface, on the surface, the near surface, and then as you go down 3 or 4,000 meters at various layers below the surface, all the way down to the sea floor. The currents change at every layer. They are on the surface quite affected by the weather, the winds, and the waves above the surface. So they also combine a model of the atmosphere with the model of the ocean. They have the interactions. They know the temperature at each layer. They know how much salinity there is in the water. And they have very complicated models. And it is absolutely clear that there are different currents and winds and eddies on the surface, and as you go down, the current pattern changes. So very complex work, and it has all been taken into consideration in the case of MH370.
Blaine, Godfrey Jack hyphen Indigo 2 Oscar uh, wants to know from you why the surface debris was not identified during the aerial search back in March, April 2014. Now, I know we've covered this before, but he wants your perspective on that, Blaine.
Well, by the time they started searching in the right ocean and the right hemisphere, by the time they started the aerial searches there, 3 weeks had passed and debris had dispersed, and there had been some storms that had hastened that dispersion. So I've spoken to people who've done aerial searches and actually conducted those aerial searches. And they've said that, they're looking for a large debris field. And they know that by then that had dispersed. And that even something the size of a flaperon on an aerial search would be easy to miss in the trough of a wave or the crest with the blink of an eye. So they did those aerial searches, but it was too late. They didn't spot anything that could be confirmed as Malaysia 370. But I and Professor Cherry and other people I have spoken with agree that you cannot dismiss an area simply because the aerial search didn't spot anything. The debris had dispersed. We can't rule areas out because of that. So over-reliance on the aerial searches and saying that the absence of evidence is evidence the plane is not there is error. We need to base the drift analysis and crash location on the oceanography, the drift analysis of debris, and other factors such as Inmarsat data and WSPR to determine where the aircraft is and where it needs to be searched.
And in fact, while you were giving us that answer, Blaine, I put up a couple of images of those storms that you refer to. There were, in fact, 3 storms went through between the time that MH370 was lost and the time they actually
Yeah.
searched in the UWA area, which is also the WSPR area. So yeah, three
Yes.
weeks is a long time, and you've got 3 weeks and 3 storms. So whatever debris was there was long gone and dispersed everywhere. So yeah. Richard, getting back to the plane guys, your China Eastern analysis, John Potter, Kilo 8 Romeo, picks me up talking about um, um, Airbus and Boeing aeroplanes in China. The Hawker Siddeley Trident, formerly de Havilland, yes, you're right, was operated by the Chinese national airline in the 1980s. You've done some analysis on that.
Yeah, John, you're quite correct. China acquired 39 Hawker Siddeley HS-121 Tridents, the 1E and 2E versions, and then the 3B version. The 1E, they got 4 of those from Pakistan in some sort of deal with Pakistan. They then purchased 33 2Es and 2 3Bs later. And there have been, in total, over the years, 8 crashes in China involving Hawker Siddeley, but that was including also hijacking that took place, and there were 163 fatalities in total.
And for viewers who don't know what a Trident is, it's basically the British equivalent of the Boeing 727, and it was a really, really nice airplane. It was a great airplane operated mainly by British European Airways, which was then later merged into British Airways. So a great aircraft. So Blaine, Sri Lankan Flyer 1999. I assume there was no more debris found since 2017. I would like to see more them in detail if able. Looking forward to seeing the new ones. Well, you got some news on that one, Blaine, I'm sure.
Yes, I do. And there has been debris found since 2017, including debris that actually washed ashore since 2017. There was an internal cabin piece that washed ashore in August of 2018 on Riake Beach, which is included in the Annex 13 report. There was also a major piece, and the most recent one to actually wash ashore, the spoiler from Jeffreys Bay, South Africa, in late 2020 was found by a surfer during lockdown in South Africa. That has been identified from photographs and expert analysis as the spoiler, a significant piece that could even have some serial numbers on it. We don't know, but it has some clear identifying marks so we can tell what it was. That has been delivered to Malaysia, but there has been no investigation of it. There are also some other pieces that were found washed ashore in 2016 and 2017, but not recognized, reported, and collected until later. One of those would be the base plate of the vortex generator, which was found in 2016. I recovered it and handed it in 2017. However, unfortunately, the consul was assassinated before he could pick it up. It stayed in Madagascar for about 2 years during the investigation into his assassination, was finally delivered to Malaysia by courier in 2019, but still no investigation yet. I recovered on Sirica Beach the broken O panel, which had washed ashore in 2017, but I didn't get it until 2019 and wasn't really recognized until 2022. And I hand delivered it to Malaysia and had it privately investigated. It's of aviation origin. The families handed it in to Malaysian authorities, but still no official investigation. Yeah. And finally, the Tatali debris, which I recovered in November of 2022, handed in December of 2022. And it sat in Madagascar for almost 2 years, waiting for Malaysia to pay for delivery. It has been examined by an aviation engineer, not in my presence, determined to be of aviation origin, with slices in it that may have come when the engine blades impacted the panel, whatever it was, when it hit the water.
Yep.
And yet still, we have no official investigation of that, but it has been transported to an unspecified country for official investigation.
Thanks, Blaine, for that wrap up. Richard, Gast UT1. My question is, what is your opinion on the last moments of MH370? I know we've covered this a number of times, but people keep asking it. Was the plane in a controlled ditching, or was it the pilot flying incapacitated? I just watched Green Dot Aviation's video, and he concluded there was no active pilot in the final moments. I know you don't agree. I know you've got a very different opinion to that, Richard.
Well, I've also watched the Green Dot Aviation video and hundreds of other videos there are on MH370. And unfortunately, you can't believe all the videos because they're all quite contradictory. The reason I believe there was an active pilot right to the end is from the Whisper data, where we're able to track MH370 all the way through fuel exhaustion, all the way through the descent, a sharp dive of 15,000 feet per minute at one point, a recovery from that dive according to the Boeing end of flight simulations, and then a glide, an attempted controlled ditching, which failed quite clearly, as Blaine has pointed out quite correctly. And there was an active pilot all the way right to the end, trying to control the aircraft. And as we showed in the Boeing 767 video, which ditched uh, off the coast of the Comoros Islands, it is very difficult to ditch an aircraft in a sea with relatively high waves like the Indian Ocean. They couldn't even ditch it off the Comoros Islands where there weren't 2 or 3 meter waves. It was relatively flat. And if you don't keep the wings absolutely level and one wingtip hits the water, the aircraft will immediately cartwheel and then it'll break up, in that case, in the fuselage into 3 distinct pieces, like Jeffrey mentioned earlier. I think with MH370, it is in many more pieces and completely shattered, as Blaine has pointed out from the debris evidence.
Thank you, Richard. Viewers, unfortunately, we're running out of time again. Um, so, um,
Jeffrey, there was one viewer who wanted us to do 1 hour
yes, I
shows,
know. I
not
saw
half
that.
hour shows.
I saw that, and it's a challenge from a point of view of uploading because there's quite a few processes to go through with YouTube, and each one of them takes about 10 to 15 to 20 minutes, and that's for a half-hour show. So you end up spending 3 hours editing it all. So to do an hour would be just a bit too much of a challenge. But so this week we've got Richard tomorrow with the MH370 checklist. Blaine, I'm hoping I can get you back on Thursday if you're free,
Sure,
and we can go
fine.
through the questions that we haven't got to with you. There's about 4 or 5 more, plus there's more than that to get through, which would be great to have you back on Thursday. And maybe even on Friday. So, but on Sunday, we've got Richard, who's going to give us an update on what Captain Martin Smith saw. And that's really intriguing. That is really great. Um, so, viewers, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. And if you're not subscribing, please do. Please like us and please keep the comments coming. We love them. Richard, thank you for your research and joining us today. And Blaine, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, you're welcome. And I do see some great questions by Jane Glue and Plug Seeker and many others that I'll be happy to answer as soon as we get back on this Thursday or Friday, as you wish.
Done deal. Fantastic. Thank you both.